Hi guys. So today is going to be a little bit different than usual. I'm not doing a cover in this video. I'm going to talk about myself, which apparently a lot of people do on YouTube. Um, so I'm not really used to it, but I'll tell you who I am and what my story is in a few separate pieces because it's long and it's a lot. So this is going to be like the synopsis version of everything that's happened so far in my life. So basically, I grew up with my parents, two sisters, and my twin brother. My two sisters are both 4 years apart. So Caitlin's 8 years older than me, and Kelsey's 4 years older than me. And then me and Ryan are twins. We grew up in Georgia, and I mean, we had a great childhood. My grandmother lived with us, so she was a really big part of my life until I was about 16 when she had to move into an assisted living home. But, you know, my parents are both teachers, and my dad is a band director, so my whole life was spent at the high school that my dad teaches at, because he ran the marching band and he, you know, had to be there for winter guard rehearsal and things like that. And so from a very young age, music was one of the most important things in my life. And I always looked forward to going to the band room because, you know, I got to be like a big kid. People would treat me like a big kid in the band room. And so, you know, I grew up loving my dad's band room. That was like home for me. But as a kid, I was really awkward, and I didn't always catch every social cue. I mean, I don't really now. And, you know, it made me a little bit of an outsider with people my own age. Emotionally, I didn't mature like the rest of them did. I was still very sensitive for a very long time. And, you know, you can blame whatever, but I just think I was born as an emotional kid. I have the biggest heart. You know, my parents told me that from the very beginning, that I was always the person who wanted to help everybody else. But it also meant that I was somebody who, you know, took everything and held on to it. And so, you know, I didn't see it at the time, but around 4th or 5th grade, I started showing the very first signs of like anxiety and things like that. But right around that time, I also was introduced to color guard, which is a massive part of my life. And if you don't know me personally, and you're just here because you clicked on the channel, then you don't know that. If you do know me personally, obviously you know that. My parents actually met doing something called drum corps, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But yeah, it was first introduced to me because my sister went off on drum corps tour, and I promised myself that I would learn how to spin before she got back. And so my mom, who was the color guard coach at the high school, let me, you know, fulfill my goal by letting me spin a broken ratty rifle. So that was the pride and joy in my life at that point. Excuse me. Around middle school, I was starting to realize that I probably had a problem with being an anxious person. I was made fun of a lot. I actually started middle school in crutches because I used to have a problem with the muscles in my leg, and I had to be in a cast for a while. And I got made fun of for that, and I got made fun of because I was a little chunky, and I got made fun of for a lot of things. I was just an awkward kid. And middle school is already an awkward time. So, you know, through my very first year of middle school, I started to get like really down on myself, and I didn't understand why. And I felt like, you know, nobody liked me. and nobody would care if I wasn't around anymore. And I look back now and I realize how incredibly sad it is to think about an 11-year-old kid going through that and feeling like they didn't have anybody they could tell. And it wasn't because my parents made me feel that way. It was because I felt like I was letting my parents down if I told them that they would be upset. They would be crushed. So I couldn't tell them that. And so I told my English teacher. And obviously, any public school employee is a mandated reporter. And if you don't know what that means if you think a child is in danger, you report it to your superior. If you think a child might do something to harm themselves, you report it to your superior. If you think anything minorly wrong might be going on in their home, you report it to your superior. Because that's the safety net that keeps kids from getting hurt. Sorry, I have a cough right now. And so she supported me by telling the counselor. And the counselor supported me by telling my parents. And that was hard. Coming home that night was hard. Having to tell them what I had told the counselor was hard. And, we did what we could, and they did what they thought was best for me. But that was literally just the tip of the iceberg, because right after my first year of middle school, I had some really, 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 really bad things happen to me. Sorry, I'm going to get choked up. And I didn't talk about any of that for 6 years after it happened. And I felt like I was protecting people by not talking. But in reality, all I was doing was growing my anxiety and depression, and what I couldn't recognize then as the beginning of what would be a problem with eating. So, I went through middle school, I did choir, I was pretty good at it. I got a lot better with being able to hear pitch towards the end of middle school. At the beginning, it was rough. But we started to get places, and I started high school. And starting high school meant that I started to be in the marching band, which was so exciting because it was finally my turn. I had watched both of my sisters go through the program. I had watched all of my friends that were older than me come through the program, and now it was finally my turn. And that was just the most exciting thing in my whole entire life. So, I loved it. It was everything to me. And it may or may not have been my way of coping. I didn't see it that way at the time, but it was. I was in gifted and AP classes in high school. I don't think I'm extraordinarily smart, but I'm pretty good at English, and I'm also pretty good with science. But math was never my thing, ever. And I had a really, really, really hard time my freshman year in math, just because of some literal philosophical differences with people. And so my mom had to help me pass my standardized test after I failed it the first time. And, I mean, she sat up with me every night. And we went through and we just relearned. Because I did not retain a drop of that information the whole year. So, I passed it, and I went on to my sophomore year, and my sophomore year, I had to face my grandmother moving, and while my grandmother and I mean, you live in a house with somebody, you're going to fight sometimes, and sometimes we did, and, we had our differences, but when she was leaving, I realized how much I didn't want that to happen. So it just became a really sad time for me, and to cope with that, I ate my feelings, and I gained a lot of weight, and it made me really insecure. So I went from being somebody who felt like they were an okay size to being very painfully aware of how large I was. As junior year started, I got into one of my first serious relationships. And he's a sweet boy. He's still friends with my brother. Hi, Claude. And, we were together for 2 years, and he was what I needed at the time. But my junior year was also when everything kind of fell to pieces for me mentally. This was the year when my mental illness was gonna rear its ugly head. And unfortunately, it was because of some really hurtful and harmful things that other people had said. I mentioned before that I was always a really sensitive person, and that I always took things to heart. And when I was in high school, that was still very much a problem for me. So I, took what people who I considered my friends to be, and their words and their opinions, to heart. So when somebody looked at me and I was sobbing in the guardroom floor, and they looked at me and said, well, if you would just skip a few meals, you might fit into your uniform a little better. And at the time, I don't know why I didn't see that as such a hateful and harmful thing to say, but at the time, I thought she was looking out for me. So my eating issues began to get out of control, and I went from being 145 pounds to 105 pounds. And I blamed it on the fact that I switched to a gluten-free diet, and I did this and that and the other. But the real reason that happened was because I didn't eat breakfast before I went to school. I would buy a Rice Krispie treat from the vending machine and eat that for lunch. And then I would finally come home and I would let myself have under 500 calories. Saying that out loud kind of boggles my mind. But when you face recovery, like I have now, you have to be willing to lay those facts out in front of yourself and face what you did. So I went through my junior year, and that was the biggest thing that happened to me. I was captain of the color guard at that point. I was with my boyfriend, but the biggest thing in my life was my eating disorder. Until that summer. On May 6th, I believe, I went to a restaurant here in our town, and I ate a grilled chicken salad. The chicken was not cooked all the way, and I got a parasite. it made me have symptoms that were like food poisoning. And at first it got better, but then it got so much worse. So on June 31st, I received my first feeding tube. And on July 1st, I received my first NJ tube, which is a tube that passes your stomach and goes to your intestine to keep you from being able to vomit things up. It took us 6 months, but I was finally diagnosed with something called post-viral gastroparesis. And my life was changed. And I'm going to make another video about all of that because it's just too much to describe in one. But it put me on hospital homebound in school. It made me unable to participate in band the way that I wanted to. And it made me have a lot more anxiety. It made my eating disorder really ravage my life. And so when I graduated, I really had to own up and face what was going on. My summer after I graduated was spent doing nothing other than not eating. And I was in therapy and everything, but if I'm being honest, I wasn't being honest in therapy. And why are you even going if you're not going to be honest? But that fall, I received a contract to march with an independent winter guard called Reverie Independent. And that was the catalyst that made me change my life. And I will be forever thankful to the people who took a chance on me at Reverie, because that contract made me realize that I could not mess around with this anymore. So I started being honest in therapy, and I saw a psychiatrist that I felt was going to help me. I have a serious thing about psychiatrists. I don't know why. But I finally saw one, and they prescribed me medicine, and I started to make myself try new things, because for a while I just allowed myself to be on tube feeds and didn't try to eat again. But with post-viral gastroparesis, it's very likely that you'll regain the ability to eat. So I started trying to make myself eat things, and for a while it was literally just ice cream. Like, just ice cream, which is terrible for you. But I was putting something in my mouth, and I was swallowing it. So people were happy. Time went on. I spent 2 years with Reverie Independent. I was in Reverie Open for 1 year and Reverie A for 1. I was on the weapon line in Reverie A, and I was a dancer in Reverie Open. And, you know, my time with Reverie will always be something that I hold close to my heart. They did teach me a lot. And while I'm not marching with them anymore, I still love so many people in that organization, and I do hope they know that. But my time with Reverie was also the time where my gastroparesis started to ease up, and I was starting to be able to eat again, and I was starting to be able to, you know, face those demons with food because I had to now. And, you know, everything started to work again, which meant I had to work even harder to keep my recovery on track. And so, you know, my gastroparesis lessened, and I had to work harder in therapy, but at the end of the day, it worked. And so here I am now. This past summer, I marched in a junior corps for DCI as an alternate with Crossman, and I had the time of my life. I actually got sick because I was hit in the J-tube, and it, like, it messed up my intestine and I had to come home, unfortunately. But, you know, I learned a lot from my time this summer. Future plans, I am going to start nursing school in the fall. I actually have a boyfriend right now, so he's obviously in my future plans. I'm going to Crossman again this summer. I've had my J-tube removed as of 2 weeks ago, and I am, you know, eating like a normal person. After this summer, I'm planning on taking a break from color guard for a little while, just because I have to be a real person and be a grown-up and finish my schooling and things like that. But I am hopefully going to be starting CrossFit because that's something I've always wanted to try, and with my money not all going to color guard, it's going to all go to nursing school and CrossFit. So that is me. If you're still here, congratulations. I'm really surprised you made it all the way through. But this is going to be a multiple series video because there are some things that I mentioned that I'm going to go more in depth with. But for now, that's all I got. And I will talk to all of y'all next time. Thanks for watching.